Chapter 177 to 179. Welcome to Uzushio, Jiraiya-sama. Thank you. Beautiful. Jiraiya beckoned the woman responsible for reviewing documents at the gate to the village. Could you tell me, where can I find the hot springs? He asked, his grin turning loop-sided, only for the woman to look at the old creeper in obvious but polite disgust. It's 3 streets away that way, she answered with a broken smile, fully intending to alert the proper authorities the second he left. Clueless Jiraiya simply nodded before briefly pondering about inviting the juicy redhead wonder in front of him for a date, but decided to bite his tongue. After all, he was a ninja on a mission, and the woman looked really repulsed by him. Sigh, what did I do now? Such disrespect for super perverts. He thought despondently while shaking his head in clear amusement. Contrary to the popular belief of anyone familiar with Jiraiya, the very first thing the Sannin did was walk around the Uzushio, creating a mental map of the village, or at least the allowed parts of it. Jiraiya could only narrow his eyes as he noted how many areas were inaccessible by travelers despite the village not being officially one of the hidden villages. Trading town, they call it, and yet barely 40% of the village could be toured. This is fishier than Sensei's relationship with Danzo. Well, no fear. First the hotel, and then... Jiraiya's face suddenly loosened. Research. Needless to say, the people of Uzushio were very startled by the weird, loud, and creepy white-haired old man running through the streets of their village, as if his life depended on it while looking for a hotel, having a perpetual perverted grin on his face. The evening came and Jiraiya laid on his futon in his hotel room in the Whirlpool Hotel, the best and most expensive hotel in the whole village. Well, secret mission or not, Jiraiya had enough money to splurge a lot, so why should he live in some rundown motel on the edge of the city? I finally understand why Sarutobi-sensei always said Uzumaki are to be feared. No wonder even the second Hokage was utterly terrified by them. These demons actually created anti-peeking seals. Waterfalls of tears streamed down Jiraiya's cheeks as he complained at the injustice he encountered. How dare they? Criminals. Unfortunately for Jiraiya, his research was interrupted due to his complete inability to peek in the hot springs. That was when he was forced to take his hat off and pay respect to the Uzumaki seal masters. Poor guy was forced to do the only other way of researching he knew, going to a brothel. Fortunately for Jiraiya, in the past 2 years, Uzushio became one of the main trading hubs in the world due to the incredibly high living standards of its inhabitants and the unusual goods usually using seals to work. This success naturally attracted all sorts of people. Thugs, the Uzushio police force could handle. These usually found themselves outside of the village with so many bruises and broken bones they would never dare coming closer than a kilometer away from the village. But as the number of visiting merchants increased, the Uzumaki clan who all but ruled the village had to make a few concessions and allow a few brothels to form. The redhead heaven. I think I shall report to Sensei that the mission got delayed, and I will be spending a few months on this heavenly ground. They certainly know how to use the reputation of Uzumaki to attract customers. Jiraiya giggled before sighing in content as a frown set in on his face. Just a pity no real Uzumaki was among those redheads. His eyes narrowed in suspicion while his lips' expression twisted sourly. Jiraiya still remembered Kushina, and from her, he knew the most likely features of an Uzumaki woman. Needless to say, it was easy to spot none of the girls there were actually from the Uzumaki clan if one knew what to look for. But Uzushio is using brothels to gather intelligence in their own village. That's not really good. This is one of the main trading hubs, meaning there are many people with even more secrets passing through. Who knows when some important noble idiot from the Land of Fire gets his tongue undone by a pretty big-breasted redhead, just because he was foolish enough to drink that incredibly strong sake they serve. Naturally, Jiraiya was very experienced in this field, especially when it pertained to courtesans and their job. He dedicated a big part of his life to the small nuances of information gathering in this field, with him owning a massive chain of brothels all over the Land of Fire, and even other countries under various aliases using scapegoats as his public image. He knew exactly what subtle manipulations are used to make the clients more agreeable to disclose their secrets. Jiraiya was actually quite surprised he didn't find any subtle genjutsu-inducing seal inside the establishment, with this being the territory of the Uzumaki clan. He certainly used those in his establishments. Not that he was actually persuaded there was none of those. It just meant they were competent enough to hide them even from his trained eyes. This is such a drag. Jiraiya whined as his perverted grin appeared on his face again in full. Now I just have to go there again to totally ascertain there is no ulterior motive at work and unveil all their methods of getting the information. Yeah, our ninjas will benefit greatly from knowing what to expect from the place. I will gladly sacrifice myself for the greater good of Konoha's male population. He nodded in complete conviction and righteous tears moistening his eyes. Jiraiya was far from the first Konoha ninja visiting Uzushio. Many merchants traveled there, and that meant a lot of foreign ninjas from all over the elemental nations came with them as their escort. Obviously, only an idiot would believe there was no specially selected ninja supposed to act as a spy and find out as much about the village as possible. There were naturally tons of covert spies in these escort parties, and yet, from what Sarutobi-sensei said, not one of our previous spies managed to find out what is in the restricted section of the village. I would bet my completely worthless ninja, Pei Yuzishio, is secretly training ninjas and waiting to get stronger before declaring themselves a bona fide hidden village. Jiraiya's thoughts again became serious. The plan is sound, though. Like this, they will. No, he frowned. Correction, they already have a lot of support from foreign daimyos who are completely in love with their products. There is no way for any hidden village to openly attack them and not cause a major diplomatic incident. Looks like their previous destruction indeed taught these redheads something. They have as much time as they need to get to the level of the Major Five, but nobody can really antagonize them. After all, they're just merchant villages, right? Why would ninja villages bother with them, no? You dare to spy, or God forbid, attack the suppliers of my favorite product? Look how I will cut the funding for your village to negative numbers, you scum. Jiraiya mockingly imitated an enraged daimyo in his head as he snorted. Yeah, Yuzishio became nigh untouchable, officially, that is. Jiraiya found it almost poetic. The people behind the newfound rise of the Uzumaki clan must be really knowledgeable in the way how the world worked. Yuzishio didn't rise to monumental heights in 2 short years because of overwhelming power, but because of politics and using an exact moment where all major powers were either dealing with their own problems or with each other. In an ideal world, Yuzishio would be razed to the ground the second it became public knowledge the Uzumaki clan is trying to reestablish it. They would be destroyed just because they were a threat in the past, and honestly, that was completely enough for IWA and Kumo to act. But we don't live in an ideal world. Jiraiya snorted. Power is nice and all, but politics is what really matters unless you are on the level of Madara or Hashirama. The only way to attack Yuzishio was covert one, outside of the official records. Not one spy who was sent to Yuzishio was actually there on an official mission to spy on Yuzishio. If they died or worse were discovered, during it, they would simply be written off as rogue ninjas working on their own. Their fates would then become not Konoha's problem anymore. And that was what really drove Konoha's higher-ups sparse. Every single spy we sent was discovered and discreetly returned to us with a mocking description of how utterly useless they were. Jiraiya would laugh if it were only people trained by Danzo, but some of these spies were trained personally by him, and that made it personal. Worst of all, not one of them actually remembers how they were discovered. They simply blacked out, and the next thing they remember is being outside of the village with a message directed to Hokage and bruised black and blue. Who knows what kind of information was pulled out of them while they were out of it? And that was in a nutshell the reason why the best spy master of Konoha was currently on a vacation from chasing Hordash, Ahem, or Orochimaru. He would find out what nefarious things were going on in this village full of gingers. Who knows what other atrocities other than anti-peaking seals were brewing up under the visage of a peaceful town. No longer was it just a job for his village. Now it was his pride as a super pervert that was beckoning him to find out for sure. And then, Jiraiya was suddenly pulled out of his righteous contemplations as a knock resounded through his room, causing him to furrow his brows as he knew he didn't expect anybody to visit. In an office in one of the manors in the Uzumaki village, Kaya's mother, Kara Uzumaki, was relaxing with a smoking pipe in her mouth and her feet resting on her desk while her husband contently massaged her shoulders and hummed a relaxing tune. Oh, Kara had no illusions how they would spend the night. Even if her selfless husband did so much only to make her feel better without expecting anything in return, it would be only fair to reward him, no? But before that, you say one of the girls in the Redhead Haven reported Jiraiya of the Sannin trying to pull information out of her during the act. Kara asked, completely amused while enjoying the hands of her husband kneading the muscles around her neck. Her secretary, a tall red-headed man, nodded. Yes, Kara-sama, how do you wish to proceed? Leave it and give the girl a raise. Kara shrugged. My daughter is certainly already aware of our new visitor with his not-so-discreet attempt at peeking in the hot springs, and he would no doubt receive his warning soon. I just really hope he will be arrogant enough to ignore it. Kara's eyes glinted. After all, shaming one of the Sannin? Wasn't that the best way to gain a reputation for Yuzishio? How come it became so easy to become famous in the ninja circles? The opportunities could be said to be throwing at them, no? Jiraiya lazily stood up from his bed and went to open the door. His right hand was cautiously preparing to grasp the hidden knife in his sleeve while his left hand was opening the door. Naturally, he didn't let himself be wide open, and instead, most of his body was obstructed by the door. Jiraiya of the Sannin? Asked the masked green-haired slim woman with orange bangs who stood in front of his door. Yes, Jiraiya nodded, now knowing what to expect. He was quite famous these days, so he would half expect a warm welcome, such as a visit from resident Anbu, if he stepped into a hidden village. The problem was, Yuzishio was supposed to be just a normal trading city. To think they wouldn't even try to hide the fact there are ninjas in the city. Jiraiya stared, half in disbelief that Yuzishio had the gall to send the Anbu. He judged the woman's identity by the mask. They were not even supposed to have to give him a greeting. The leader of Yuzishio must have considerable balls to do this. That's one man I wouldn't want to compare the sexual prowess with. He grudgingly admitted with newfound respect, totally clueless about the leader being a woman. I was sent by Kaiosama. Jiraiya's eyes slightly widened at that admission, causing him to instantly reconsider his willingness of prowess comparison. To give you a very simple warning. We know you are Konoha's spy master, so don't spy. You won't like the consequences. The woman dryly stated, not amused at all at the raised brow her statement earned her. Jiraiya clearly didn't take her seriously, and if his expression was any indication, he found the entire situation extremely hilarious. Don't worry, cutie. I came here to enjoy my vacation, Jiraiya jovially stated. So, what's your name? If you want to keep me from spying, it would be best to keep an eye on me, no? I don't mind being watched over by someone of your proportions, he said as he started to discreetly ogle her curves. Jiraiya honestly could not help himself. He might not be able to see the woman's face but her body. He could tell she was an extremely dangerous and totally gorgeous individual. Frankly, he was hooked. His addiction to these kinds of women probably stemmed from his infatuation with Tsunade. It mostly resulted in him being beaten, but he simply couldn't resist. Jiraiya's merry mood brought up by the juicy female in front of him quickly came to a screeching halt as his danger senses suddenly flared to high heavens, and the hair all over his body suddenly stood up. His eyes connected to the narrowed brown orbs as sweat started appearing on his brows from the sudden shot of temperature in the room. Jiraiya was honestly unable to react to such a subtle yet potent killing intent he was currently bathed in. His body cramped up, prepared to strike as his instincts warned him, but his mind told him, not yet. Still safe. This contrast made Jiraiya into the miserable sweating mess of nerves he was now. His instincts wanted to attack, but his body commanded by his confused mind couldn't move. He was not paralyzed nor frightened. He was simply confused by all the signals his senses were receiving, and his mind was unable to tell his body what to do with them. There was killing intent at full blast aimed at him, and yet, it had no desire to do harm. There was danger staring right at him, yet it felt so peaceful his mind couldn't figure out how to react. Naturally, Jiraiya didn't have a clue what his body and mind felt. He was simply confused as his instincts and reflexive reaction to danger honed through life-threatening battles completely failed him in the face of this ANBU. He felt as if he was staring at a dangerous snake bearing its fangs at him, and yet, the woman in front of him was simply calmly staring at him. Time slowly passed as the two motionlessly stood opposite each other, when Jiraiya suddenly widened his eyes into saucers as his mind was ruthlessly yanked from its thoughts when the curtains and sheets caught on fire. Shit, how come I didn't notice this heat? Jiraiya hurriedly thought, feeling his throat dry and parched, as if he didn't drink anything for a week when his senses finally caught up with what was happening around him. Honestly, he doubted he would be able to do anything but croak out some unintelligible sound if he was to talk. Jiraiya could feel his skin blister, sending a jolt of hot pain through the surface of his body. Water was evaporating straight from his body that screamed at him in boiling agony, while his brain was shutting out from the sheer heat he was under. His dry lips desperately yearned for a bit of wetness while his eyes started to sting, causing him to blink due to discomfort as he gritted his teeth at how agonizing it was to do something as simple as breathing. The room was bathed in scorching warmth, embracing everything it engulfed. Jiraiya's rampant instincts screamed at him to get away, to stop whatever was trying to mummify him alive, to do something. He was about to attempt using a jutsu when, "I am called Sun, Jiraiya-sama." Everything suddenly stopped to a halt at the soothing voice of the woman, who still calmly stood in front of him, as if the world wasn't a smoldering hell just a second ago. A frightening chill ran through Jiraiya's body as he realized there was no heat. No life-threatening scorch. No blisters on his skin. Nothing. He was fine, as if everything he felt was just one elaborate illusion. A rattled breath involuntarily left Jiraiya's lips at the realization, and his brows furrowed in desperate confusion. What the hell was that? A killing intent? Genjutsu? His eyes glanced at the blackened remains of the curtains and the burnt spots on the sheets, causing him to gulp. No, that was no genjutsu, and it was obviously much more than a simple killing intent. But she didn't use any chakra. How in Rakuto's name was she able to? Jiraiya cautiously eyed Sun, his hands jumpy as if he expected her to attack him any moment now. As for the date, Sun started speaking again, causing Jiraiya to jump a little. I am not that desperate. Just remember the warning. With that, the woman shunshined away, leaving Jiraiya dumbly stare at the place from where she disappeared. Thoughts were flashing through his head too fast for him to comprehend, and it was only now that he noticed how erratic his heartbeat was. Slowly, his mind started to get out of its numb state, sharpening, and Jiraiya found out he was trembling. His body was shaking and a small sting made itself known, causing him to look at his hands with an incomprehensible look full of confusion, only to find himself clutching kunai with no idea when he drew it. His grip was so strong, his nails dug deep enough into his palm to draw blood. For a moment, Jiraiya stared at his hand with kunai, his expression turning difficult as conflict flashed through his eyes before he finally found enough strength to take a deep breath before slowly closing the door. That was scary. Jiraiya let his coiled muscles calm down, trying to forcefully relax his nerves while he shakily walked towards his bed. I didn't feel such dread since Tsunade found me peeking at her. He muttered in a haunted tone before it became grumbling. What was she anyway? Tsunade's apprentice. Poor Jiraiya would never know his thoughts couldn't be truer. It took a whole week for Jiraiya to finally calm down his jumpiness after the sudden scorching welcome by the so-called sun. A week he fruitfully spent marking every useful information about the accessible part of Yuzushio he could get his hands on. He was Konoha's spymaster, after all. Even the creepiest and hottest scare of his life wouldn't be able to prevent his peaking tendencies from resurfacing. Now, Jiraiya was sneaking through the dark back alleys of Yuzushio, on his way to the closed-off parts of the village. He was perfectly aware of being monitored this past week. That's why he left a shadow clone with enough chakra to last for 2 days in his hotel room. Jiraiya had no illusions his shadow clone would stay there either. He knew it would not be even an hour later his shadow clone would go and try to find a pretty girl to flirt with. That too was exactly according to his plan, no matter he had no control over that marvelous quirk of his clones. This way, the annoying observers would see exactly what he wanted them. Him, flirting with somebody. Perfect alibi. All I have to do now is to sneak in, get as much intel as possible, and sneak out without being discovered and nobody can pin anything on me, hee. Jiraiya thought while sidestepping yet another of the hidden alarm seals that littered the back alleys close to the restricted areas. He was already in the section in between the restricted and the accessible areas, nimbly traversing the shadowed parts of the alley while using chakra to hide. Unfortunately for Jiraiya, that was where his little infiltration quest ended, for the Uzumaki clan was not foolish enough to leave easy-to-spot alarm seals all over the alleys without any reason. Jiraiya's sight blurred as his body suddenly felt weaker, causing him to support himself with his hand on the nearby wall. His world spun before he was driven to his knees at the feeling of weakness. At first, Jiraiya thought it to be a genjutsu and tried to flare his chakra, only to find out he couldn't access it. His eyes briefly widened in panic before rolling back as the man's body powerlessly fell forward, unconscious. Not even a second after his body hit the ground, 2 figures stepped out of the nearby shadows. One of them was the green-haired son, while the other was Kaya Uzumaki, who prodded Jiraiya with her foot a bit. This never gets old. They always spot all visible alarm seals and get cocky. Kaya chuckled. The thing that defeated the mighty Sannin was actually one massive chakra suppression seal placed in between the accessible and the restricted area. Anyone who was entered, civilian or otherwise, would drop down unconscious because their bodies and minds would register them being near chakra exhaustion, despite them having their reserves full. Actually, Kaya had no idea about its in-depth workings. All she knew that anyone who was not keyed into it would be incapacitated, hence no spy ever reached the restricted section. Well, there still was the threat of flying, but considering the entire restricted section was under the same chakra suppression, you know that he would not spot this trap no matter how long he looks around. The seals are in the walls and deep in the ground. It's not really a matter of skill at sealing anymore. Sun, or more commonly known as Pakura, said as she took off her mask. She decided to come to Yuzushio herself the second it was confirmed Jiraiya was skulking around, which was almost a month ago. Clearly, after this month, she held some resentment for the man because his presence kept her away from Rei. Yeah, you got a point. Still, it doesn't make it less hilarious how everybody so valiantly steps into the chakra suppression field only to keel over a second later. If they waited a bit on the edge, they would get out of it easily after recognizing something was wrong, but they all just hurry, and by the time they realize their chakra is acting weird, they have no time to escape. Kaya seemed almost wistful as she said that. Yuzushio is frankly impenetrable due to this seal. If only it could be made portable. We would win every single fight because our enemies would just drop unconscious. Pakura snorted as she crouched near Jiraiya and started to look through his pockets. You know that's impossible. Rei had 20 clones drawing seals for half a year in order to set up the chakra suppression field all over the restricted section of Yuzushio. The thing requires far too many seals and far too much precision to make this portable. Oh, here it is. Pakura smiled at the small scroll she found and unrolled it, quickly reading the contents while Kaya busied herself with trying to discern the location of her ANBU guards. She was something like acting Kage of Yuzushio, so she knew they were somewhere around her, but these ninjas trained by Ringo. Honestly, even though Kaya prided herself in being Chunin level ability-wise, she had not even smidge of an inkling of where exactly her guard detail was located. Maybe they ditched me? I would most definitely not even notice. Kaya frowned only to be pulled out of her thoughts as her hand instinctively sprang, catching the scroll Pakura threw at her. Kaya's eyebrows furrowed, giving Pakura an inquisitive look, but only got a go-on gesture in return. Kaya swept the contents of the scroll with her eyes only to derisively snort after she was done. There is nothing of importance. He found out exactly nothing in the last week of visiting brothels day and night. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, Kaya might have felt a bit of contempt for this so-called best spymaster of Konoha, especially after seeing him at work. Pakura, however, had a different opinion. You know I took you with me to give you a bit of a lesson. She sighed, her eyes gazing at Kaya in an admonishing way. He did not find nothing. He found out a lot, actually. Sure, the information in that scroll is easily accessible to any spy who could be bothered spending some time snooping around the unrestricted areas. But with all the information he found out and categorized, Konoha ninjas will have an easier time acclimatizing in this village, giving him a bit of an edge over ninjas from other hidden villages. He mapped out everything from the best shops and their location to the quickest escape routes. Pakura lectured as a smirk appeared on her face. And look, he even included all the brothels and his personal ratings. Isn't it just a delight to know your mother's red heaven is his personal favorite? Pakura mentioned, knowing Kaya's opinion on the topic, and giggled at the peeved expression of the redhead. Don't expect me to be proud of that. Kaya huffed and angrily stomped her foot into the ground. She was not happy with this part of her mother's holdings. Far from it, no matter how good of an information network it provided. All right. Pakura shook her head in amusement as she put the scroll back into Jiraiya's clothes. Don't get so angry with me. It was just a simple joke, geez. She said as her eyes landed back onto Jiraiya's body, and her slight gentle smile slowly turned into an irritated sneer while her eyes narrowed in anger. Oh boy, Kaya somehow started pitying the white-haired man. Frankly, Rei told Pakura to let it go and leave Uzushio to sort this situation with Jiraiya out. She didn't listen. She simply could not. As someone raised on stories of the Sannin, someone who knew about Jiraiya's prowess in espionage, she could not calm down knowing he was currently in Uzushio. So, she personally went to sort the situation out. The worst mistake of her month. Jiraiya, to be perfectly honest, was an incredible spy. 3 whole weeks, he preserved in probing and prodding the defenses of Uzushio from every possible angle, trying to find a way how to secretly enter the village. The first week, it was funny, hilarious even. The second, it started to become irksome. The third, however, Pakura had had enough of seeing his 100th attempt without him getting the hint it simply won't work. Thankfully, just as Pakura was about to decide to go and make eunuch from Jiraiya, the man finally realized he is not as good with seals as he apparently thought himself to be, and stopped making an idiot out of himself by trying to deactivate the disgusting amount of detection seals around the village, placed there by the best Uzumaki seal grandmasters in Uzushio. Pakura's judgment might have been a bit screwed though. Jiraiya rightfully deserved to be called Seal Master, as he didn't trigger even one detection seal in the 3 weeks he tried to get past them. Pilfering some knowledge from Minato, who was taught by Kushina or not, Jiraiya was simply too inexperienced and didn't know the right techniques to do anything with Uzumaki seals. If one simply looked at his skill level and compared it with other non-Uzumaki seal users, then yes, Jiraiya was one of the best. Alas, this was Uzushio he was trying to get into. So, with Jiraiya unable to get in secretly, he opted for going in boldly. He walked inside through the main gate. Jiraiya actually briefly thought about disguising himself first, but if the security seals around the village were any indication, he quickly determined it would not work, and being discovered would make everything worse for himself. For that, Pakura respected his ability as an infiltrator and the sheer guts he showed by tackling this in such a straightforward manner. If this was any other village, he would probably succeed too, since it took some time, even for Pakura, to notice the swap of the man with his shadow clone. Only a tracking seal she snuck into his pocket during her brief visit alerted her that the white-haired bastard in front of her was not the original, and led her to the location of the real Jiraiya before he was knocked unconscious. Now, how to punish the man in the most humiliating way that would make Rei praise me. Pakura's eyes darkened and glinted in a peculiar way that made Kaya take a step back when Pakura turned towards her with a mischievous smile. Hey Kaya, you said the brother of the Earth Daimyo, one of the 5 grand nobles of the land of Earth, is currently visiting the village, right? Pakura's eyes started to hover over Jiraiya's unconscious form, narrowed in a cat-like way with a bit of glee in them. I wonder,